can see you.
Welcome in, or welcome back, to the Veiled Archive. If you're new here, understand that we do not deal in standard reviews. We are an excavation site. We dismantle the engines of fear to see how their gears grind together. Today we are opening a very specific, heavily contaminated file, Room 316 by Joshua Bish. This is the second installment in the Salma de Terre series, following The Lady in Flesh. But if that first book was a sprawling historical wound in the earth, Room 316 is a localized infection. It is a novella, short, compressed, and devoid of the sprawling third person omniscience that defined its predecessor. The why of this book's existence is mechanical. It serves as a structural thoroughfare. It is a bridge connecting the massive door stoppers of the series, paving the way toward the Gospel of Ash. But do not mistake its brevity for a reprieve. It exists to show us what happens when the entity known as the Tear traps its prey in a confined space. The narrative engine here relies on disjointedly menacing detachment. We are not given a steady guide. Instead, the horror is translated for us by an unreliable narrator, sifting through the wreckage of the past. The story is stitched together through a clinical collection of journal entries, campus news outlets, and the deteriorating internal thoughts of the campus chief of police, Kent. The entity that haunts Room 316 operates on distinct patterns of physical wrongness. It does not simply scare the occupants or terrorize Chief Kent. It breaches the finite tendrils of human comprehension. It is an unsatiated appetite that infects the minds, bodies, and souls of anyone it sets its aggression upon. In this text, the entity is not just haunting a room, it is using the room as a mouth, and the reader's psyche is on the menu. So, what sets Room 316 apart from the established architecture of this series? The answer lies in its frequency and its clinical deviation. Joshua Bish has deliberately abandoned the sweeping generational timeline of The Lady in Flesh to conduct a highly compressed experiment in structural claustrophobia. The narrative mechanics here are entirely different. We are no longer observing from a safe third-person distance. We are forced into the fragmented headspace of an unreliable narrator. This narrator is attempting to translate a trauma. That's better. That defies translation, piecing the past together through a disjointed collage of journal entries, sterile campus news outlets, and the unraveling psychological logs of the campus chief of police, Kent. What makes this clinical deviation so effective is the contrast. Bish maintains the rhythmic, hypnotic prose that gives the Psalm series its name, but he weaponizes it through detachment. The horror mechanism doesn't rely on a traditional monster stalking the halls. Instead, it operates through a disjointedly menacing detachment. The entity, the Tear, manifests as a pattern of physical wrongness. It breaches the finite tendrils of human comprehension not by tearing flesh, but by infecting the cognitive processing of its victims. Chief Kent, the narrator, the occupants of the room, they are all subjected to the localized biological and spiritual breakdown. The threat here is an active infection of the psyche that eventually reaches out from the page to test the structural integrity of the reader's own mind. It is a precise surgical strike of dread that proves the author can terrify us just as effectively in a confined modern space as he did in the sprawling hills of Appalachia. Now we must step out of the claustrophobic confines of Room 316 to examine the architect who built the trap. In the Veiled Archive, we often discuss the biographical paradox of the horror author. How does a mind that engineers such systemic dread function in the mundane world? From the fan's perspective, the reality is often beautifully disarming. A few weeks past, my wife and I had the opportunity to establish physical coordinates with Joshua Bish and his narrator for Echoes in the Stone, Daniel Hervier, whom we've previously discussed on the channel at the Appalachian Wordfest. You might expect the man who writes of biological nihilism in the inescapable infection of the Tear to be a brooding or detached. The paradox is that Joshua is one of the most grounded, down-to-earth, and likable individuals you could hope to encounter. He is incredibly approachable, vibrating with an enthusiasm to talk shop and openly dissect the narrative mechanics of the genre with his readers. This accessibility is a crucial metric for us here at the Archive. We support Bish not just for his structural integrity on the page, but for his active participation in the ecosystem. He is currently executing book signings and charting a course to attend more conventions as his journey expands. He is not a recluse hiding behind a keyboard. He is an architect standing in the sunlight, actively building the community he simultaneously terrifies. It is exactly why we continue to champion his work. To truly understand the structural mechanics of Room 316, we must place it in the laboratory alongside the architects who have built similar traps. Horror is a dialogue, and Bish is responding to a very specific lineage of claustrophobia and epistolary dread. I want you to look at these 4 case studies to understand the exact frequency Bish is operating on. The literary mandate. Case 1 study. The epistolary descent. The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Gilman perfected the localized, unreliable narrator. The story is told entirely through journal entries from a woman confined to a single room, whose mind projects a threat onto the very architecture. It is the ultimate psychological siege. In Gilman's work, the horror is internal. The call is coming from inside the house of our own mind. Bish takes this epistolary framework, the journals, the detached logs of Chief Kent, and it externalizes the rot. The madness in Room 316 is not a projection of trauma. It is a symptom of physical infection by the tear. The room isn't just driving them mad, it is digesting their sanity. In Case 2 study, The Predatory Geometry, 1408 by Stephen King. King gives us a localized spatial anomaly. The hotel room is a closed system of supernatural hostility that ignores the laws of physics and time, designed to break the human occupant within an hour. 1408 is a system of aggressive physical attrition. It is loud, immediate, and direct. Bish's Room 316 is a slow drip. It is a disjointed, creeping menace that doesn't just attack the occupant physically, but unravels the timeline of their memory. King's room wants you dead. Bish's room wants you to understand how insignificant your comprehension is before it consumes you. The non-visual mandate, Case Study 3, The Infection of Perception, the film Oculus. The film weaponizes the unreliable narrator visually. A localized object, the mirror, manipulates the physiological and psychological reality of the occupants in a single house, making it impossible for them to trust their own senses. Oculus relies on optical illusions and memory manipulation to force its characters into fatal mistakes. Bish uses the same manipulation of perception, but scales it to the spiritual level. The physical wrongness in Room 316 isn't just tricking Chief Kent's eyes, it is altering the fundamental laws of his reality. In Case 4 study, The Linguistic Virus, Pontypool. In Pontypool, the characters are trapped in a single room, a radio booth, while an infection rages outside. But the true horror is the delivery system. The infection is transmitted through language and comprehension. This is where Bish's use of the disjointed menace shines. In Pontypool, spoken words are the virus. In Room 316, the act of translating the past, the journals, the news outlets, the police reports, is the vector. The very attempt to comprehend the terror is what allows it to breach your defenses. It is a horror that punishes you for trying to understand it. If you have studied these four blueprints, you are ready to step into Room 316. But be warned, the architecture here is not designed to hold you. It is designed to change you. Now we open the chest cavity of the text. But before we measure the narrative mechanics of Room 316, we need to address why the archive relies on this specific structural audit. Why do we insist on the 3 pillars in the Lovecraft metric? In the archive, we understand that horror is not a random biological misfire, it is an engineered response. As we established in our own foundational study of the genre's architects, you cannot truly understand why a story infects you unless you dismantle the engine that drives it. These pillars are not arbitrary critical tools. They are the universal blueprints of human dread. They allow us to move past the superficial, subjective question of, was it scary, and answer the structural question, how did it successfully dismantle the scaffolding of human order? We use these metrics because, to evaluate horror properly, we must trace how an author solves the emotional and philosophical limitations of the genre. Let's see how Joshua Bish's trap holds up to the audit. Pillar A, the invasive breach, sanctuary violation. The first metric is the mechanical failure of safety. In a standard paradigm, a college dorm room is a sanctuary, a sterile, designated space for rest. Joshua Bish engineers a total mechanical failure of this sanctuary. The terror is not a passive haunt, it is an active trespasser. It does not wait in the shadows of the room. It compromises the geometry and the very air of room 316. The breach extends beyond the physical walls, violating the procedural safety of campus news outlets and Chief Kent's official police logs. The institutional safety nets fail entirely. The other has trespassed into the mundane, and the locks on the door are rendered completely, biologically irrelevant. Pillar B, the symmetrical debt, reciprocity. The horror must be a closed loop of consequence. In The Lady in Flesh, the debt was historical and generational. In Room 316, the debt is acute and intellectual. The entity possesses an unsatiated appetite, but the currency it extracts is human comprehension. The symmetrical debt here is forged through the act of investigation, by trying to translate the past, by reading the journals, compiling the reports, and trying to impose order on the physical wrongness. Chief Kent and the unreliable narrator invite the terror in. The horrific reciprocity is this: the harder you try to understand the terror, the more of your psyche it consumes. The reader, by turning the pages and attempting to solve the narrative, is pulled into this exact same debt loop. Pillar C, the experimental psyche, the condition. The third pillar demands that the protagonist's biology or mind is the actual trap. Existential entrapment. Bish executes this flawlessly through the disjointed epistolary format. The physical room 316 is merely the epicenter. The true trap is Chief Kent's deteriorating headspace. As he translates the events, his cognitive processing begins to physically break down. His mind, desperately trying to categorize an entity that defies physical laws, becomes the very cage that holds him. He is existentially entrapped by his own biological need to make sense of the senseless. And then the Lovecraft metric, or biological nihilism. When we apply the Lovecraft metric to this novella, it scores exceptionally high in the scale of biological nihilism. The terror does not care about the human drama. It does not care about Chief Kent's badge or the students' futures. Its physical wrongness infects the minds, bodies, and souls of its victims simply because they are available matter. It demonstrates with clinical detachment that human logic, emotion, and physical form are entirely fragile, finite constructs waiting to be dismantled by a superior, uncaring appetite. Now we turn to the public record. In the archive, we always examine the fan's perspective because it serves as the ultimate field test. How does the trap function when deployed in the wild? The reader response to Room 316 is fascinating because it polarizes exactly along the structural fault lines we just audited. Let us begin with the advocates. The consensus among the infected is that the atmosphere of Sarvey Hall is weaponized with incredible precision. Readers consistently praise the book's rejection of splatterpunk or traditional gore in favor of creeping, localized dread. The highlight is the epistolary format, the journal entries, the police logs, as a highly effective delivery system that crawls under your skin. But perhaps the most compelling feedback centers on a secondary layer of the trap: institutional horror. Readers are deeply unsettled by the university administration's willful blindness. The true horror, many note, isn't just the entity in the room. It's the bureaucratic machine that prioritizes dorm occupancy over safety, effectively and continuously feeding oblivious students into the mouth of the terror. They also consistently cite the auditory trigger of the tap 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 at 3:16 a.m. as a sensory detail that lingers long after the final page. However, we must also examine the detractors. The friction points in the public record are distinct and highly revealing. Some readers reported that the character development felt thin or generic, arguing that the occupants served merely as tropes. But the loudest point of polarization is the lack of a conclusive explanation. Readers express frustration that the story leaves them with more questions than answers. They wanted a neat backstory, a murdered student, a cursed burial ground, a quantifiable reason for the haunting. But here is the critical variable we must factor into our audit. Significant portion of these detractors entered the quarantine zone without reading the first title, The Lady in Flesh. They stepped onto a structural thoroughfare and were frustrated that they couldn't see the foundation. Because they lacked the overarching historical lore of the terror established in Book 1. They felt the supernatural elements were vague or lacking motive. Yet, even considering that missing context, this polarization is structurally perfect. What the detractors are experiencing is the friction of biological nihilism. They are searching for a traditional fantasy of order, a universe where monsters have logical origin stories, motives that make sense to humans and can be vanquished if you just find the right clue. But Joshua Bish refuses to give them that comfort. The lack that the lack of an explanation in Room 316 is not a failure of the book's structural integrity. It is the entire point. The terror does not owe human beings an origin story. It just is. The fact that the narrative mechanics leave readers feeling disoriented, wanting answers they cannot have, proves that the disjointed menace of the book works. It didn't just haunt the characters, it successfully breached the reader's need for comprehension. While the first installment, oh, sorry, my review. While the first installment of the Psalms of the Terror series was a sprawling exploration of ancient folklore, Joshua Bish's Room 316 pivots brilliantly toward a masterclass in claustrophobic institutional dread, shifting the nightmare to the sterile, flickering hallways of Concord University's Sarvey Hall. This novella focuses on a single dorm room that doesn't just house students, it consumes them. Bish utilizes a sophisticated, fragmented structure to weave together night shift investigations, chilling journal entries, and the unraveling sanity of those trapped within the room's four walls. The horror is viewed through the dual lenses of Officer Kent, whose health declines as he uncovers the university's complicity in decades of disappearances, and the sharp, intelligent perspective of Mara Ellison, whose descent into the room's influence is truly heartbreaking. What sets this work apart is its absolute restraint. It is a slow burn psychological thriller that favors a tightening sense of unease over cheap jump scares. The setting of Sarvey Hall becomes a character in its own right, defined by an unholy presence that warps time and an auditory dread, the signature tap 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 at 3:16 a.m. that echoes the rhythmic psalm-like tension established in the series' debut. By exploring how specific places can hold on to pain and grief, Bish deepens the overarching lore of the tetralogy while maintaining a story that functions perfectly as a standalone. It is a thoughtful, atmospheric, and quietly terrifying work that lingers long after the final page. With the concluding volume, Gospel of Ash, arriving 2 days ago, there is no better time to enter 316. Just don't expect it to let you go. And my personal take, and it won't be too long, Josh, this was probably the perfect transition to Blood of Psalm. By getting away from that historical reference in The Lady in Flesh, you're left with what the terror itself represents in the here and now, or as we go through the journal entry, specifically Mara's, um, you find out exactly what that deterioration looks like on our end of things, not from Winona's perspective anymore. And that is the terrifying part of this, in my honest opinion, is that the consuming of the internal psyche as well as soul is what really sets this one apart from the first one. And that's hard to do. And for me, that's what really kept the pages turning. Now, one of the things I haven't mentioned so far is the availability metric, I guess you could say. Like, we talk a lot about, either getting the KU version, paperback. A lot of times hardcovers are the way to go, in my opinion, for horror. It just feels right. I don't know why. But this is another case where the narrator really brings the story to life. And Ashen Moriar, I think I have that right. I'm trying. As you can see through past videos, I'm not really good with last names. But at any rate, Ashen did an amazing job on The Lady in Flesh. The perfect voice. I want to say it's just nonchalant, almost uncaring how you feel about the story itself. It's delivering the context in a way that your mind probably is already picturing it or viewing it, if that makes sense. And with her coming back to do this novella, it was the perfect setup. And I know that there's confirmation that she will also be doing book 3, Blood of Som, and it signed me up, man, as soon as that one's out. Yeah, consume this any way that you possibly can. I highly recommend the audio version. But one of the things that I couldn't stop that I don't want to say the creative machine, but something along that line is just making a T-shirt for Chief Kent, coming up with logos or whatever for the side, sleeves, and the back of that thing would just say "Balls of Steel." This guy is probably one of my favorite characters, probably almost ever. But at any rate, read the book and you'll find out exactly what I'm talking about. Well done again, Bish. We'll be getting into the Blood of Som review in short order. I know that WordFest haul was really piled onto the TBR, but there was already a high TBR before that even began. But I do want to get to that before we dive into Gospel. And yeah, this is just an incredible series thus far. Keep it up, Bish. For our next up, I do need to lead with a content advisory. Our next up on the Veiled Archive audit discusses extreme horror. It will contain a structural analysis that includes heavy themes of systemic institutional abuse, high-level predatory malfeasance, and a high-magnitude systemic breach events within a high school enclosure. Viewer discretion will be strongly advised. Chip D. Blade's High School Noir is a forensic audit of the 1981 analog enclosure, set in an isolated Australian high school undergoing total systemic collapse. The novel explores a terrifying reality where the guardians become the predators. Driven by biological nihilism and the crushing weight of silenced trauma, the subjects voluntarily summon an external auditor to balance the equation. It is a masterful, extreme horror blueprint of the symmetrical debt being paid in blood. Enter the enclosure on Godless and Kindle Unlimited. And with that, the file on Route 316 is officially closed, but the excavation never truly stops. If this deep dive has provided you with the correct coordinates, I urge you to test your own structural integrity and pick up Joshua Bish's work. You can find Room 316 along with the rest of the Psalm of the Terror series on Kindle Unlimited. Read it, analyze it, and most importantly, leave a review. For indie architects like Bish, reviews are the lifeblood that keeps the machinery running. Before you disconnect, we must observe the ritual. The algorithm is the one structure we cannot dismantle alone. If you found value in today's analysis, hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel and share this videos with others who treat their library like a laboratory. You can also track the archive's ongoing excavation across our ecosystem. We are logging daily field notes and structural audits across TikTok, Threads, and Instagram. Connect with us there as we continue to map the ledger. And finally, for those who wish to sustain the machinery of this channel, consider supporting the archive via the merch store, linked in the description below. Remember our core directive: 50% of all proceeds go directly to the Speculative Literary Foundation to ensure the next generation of architects has the tools to build their own nightmares.